Thank you for joining me for our After Candidate series ahead of the 2023 New South Wales state election. For the first time in many decades, we have a local person running for the upper house in this election. So today in my interview with Stephen Lawrence, we're going to spend the first half of the interview talking about the role of the upper house and how it's similar and different to the lower house. And in the second half of the interview, we'll be talking more about his candidacy. I hope you enjoy it and learn a few things like I did. Today, I have Stephen Lawrence with us, who is a candidate for the Legislative Council and a member of the Labor Party. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Laura. Thanks so much for having me and for doing this series.
My pleasure. First up, can you please describe the role of the upper house and how does it fit into the context of broader government?
Sure. So under our Westminster system of government, there are traditionally two houses of parliament, though that's not always so. For example, Queensland has no upper house, but I think I'm right in saying that every other state has both a lower and upper house. I don't think the two territories have an upper house. But traditionally in our parliamentary system that we derive from England, there are two houses of parliament, and the role of the upper house is to review and assent to legislation or approve legislation. So a significant part of the role of the upper house is to do committee work, which is to examine questions that arise from legislation or more broadly just arise as a question of policy, and also to scrutinise, amend and ultimately pass or reject legislation. Another role of members of the upper house is to serve in the executive government. So it's not uncommon at all for ministers to be drawn from both the lower and the upper house.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And so let's say we wanted to get tenancy laws changed. What's the process?
There's a variety of different ways, I think, that a citizen or a group of citizens could start a process of legislative change. So, for example, if there was a commercial interest at play, for example, real estate agents, just for example, that might want to change tenancy law, then they might go through their professional or trade association. I imagine that there is one. I'm not actually familiar with it.
Yeah.
But an ordinary citizen who's not a part of an organisation or some such could speak to their local member of parliament and raise a particular issue. They could seek a meeting or an audience with the minister, and any of those processes could lead to a process of legislative change. It's not uncommon for issues to be referred to committee, whether lower or upper house, and for committees then to recommend legislative changes. So it's not just the executive government who can, in effect, start that process. But I would broadly say if people want legislative change in a particular area, they should engage. They should engage with local members, engage with ministers, and ultimately, I guess, engage with other community members who might be of the same view, because to democracy, so the more people there are of a particular view, the more likely it is that our representatives will respond.
Thank you. And so how is being a candidate for the upper house different from being a candidate from the lower house?
Well, I'm quite well equipped, I think, to answer that question, because I've been a candidate for the lower house seat of Dubbo twice in the 2019 election, and I'm now an upper house candidate. In a practical sense, the roles are different in the sense that when you're running for the upper house, you're not running for a particular seat that is based on a certain geographical area. Yep. You're aiming to be, you will be elected by a statewide electorate, in effect. Yep. If you're running as an independent or a minor party, then, and I'm not, of course, I'm running for the Labor Party, but if you're running for an independent or a minor party, then I imagine that you would campaign in much the same way that you do in the lower house. You're trying to get your name out there, you're trying to spread your ideas and get support for them. Yeah. But practically, as an upper house candidate for the Labor Party, the focus is not really on me. The focus is very much on the lower house candidates and, of course, the leadership team. So my role in this election has been primarily in Dubbo and elsewhere, supporting the lower house candidate. And that is a range of things, from talking to them about policy issues, helping with media releases, letterboxing, door knocking, street stalls, all of the aspects of campaigning that we use in Australian society.
Great, thank you for explaining. And so why does it matter who we vote for in the upper house?
The upper house, of course, is not where the government is formed. The government is formed in the lower house, whoever can secure the majority support in the lower house. But it's important, the upper house, because no legislation, no law can pass unless it's passed by the upper house. So, for example, the Labor Party might form government in the lower house, but if we don't have a majority or a working majority, so a majority which might include us and other parties of the left or centre, for example, then we won't be able to enact those aspects of our program and policies that rely on legislative change. So I'd say that's the main importance of the upper house. You can't change the law unless you can get a majority in the upper house to support that change.
Thank you. And so on to you and your candidacy here. So what professional experience in history qualifies you to hold this paid position of state influence?
Sure. Look, I should say firstly, I mean, I'm not someone who's of the view that for elected office you need any particular qualification or a qualification at all. And there's plenty of MPs who don't have any formal qualification who are absolutely fantastic. And some of the best people I can think of that I know that I think would be really good in that role don't have a degree or any particular qualification or particular experience. But in terms of my attributes and capacities that I bring to it, I think I've got the ability to get on top of complicated things. I work as a barrister, so I guess it's part of my training to get on top of fairly complicated things fairly quickly and then be able to articulate arguments and views about that. I think that I've demonstrated in my role so far in public life in the Dubbo region that I'm approachable. I'll talk to anyone. I'm obviously Labor through and through, but I've never performed my roles in a partisan way, I don't think. And I think people across the spectrum in the community find that I'm easy to talk to, I'm accessible. I think I'm a hard worker. And I think that I've demonstrated that I'll put the interests of this community first, and I'll do it when it's hard and difficult sometimes, and I'll do the right thing. And look, people might not always agree with what I do in the future. If I'm elected, they might not certainly agree with things I've done in the past, but I hope they think that I've tried to do the right thing, and I've always had an ethic of trying to explain why I've done things.
Thank you for explaining. And what specific benchmarks will you use to determine that your time in office has been successful?
That's a good question. I mean, the nature, of politics and policy is everything is the art of the possible. You can be, I think, a fantastic member of parliament, but not necessarily at the end of your time be able to point to any big signature thing that's solely you. Yeah. You can be a great representative. You can help a whole range of people on a whole range of issues, but never have that moment of being able to say that you've gotten a particular law through or secured, any particular thing. And indeed, I mean, I've worked for a politician before. I've been involved in politics at the local level and the state level. And it's a bit frustrating sometimes when politicians try to claim all the credit for a particular thing because it happened to pass into law or become a policy during their particular time, even if they've been in a position of leadership. Because what I've learned is that the business of government, it's a ship. A big part of the ship is the public service in the community. And right at the top of the ship are the elected representatives. And they play an important role, and an important role, I think, in being a check on bureaucracy. And I think one of the most important things that you should look for in a politician is someone that won't just go along with the bureaucracy all the time. And I don't say that to denigrate the bureaucracy. I've worked in the bureaucracy. It's incredibly important and there's amazing people there. But the bureaucracy is not elected. So, yeah, I'm not going to be this person who takes credit and responsibility for everything that might happen in the term that I'm in Parliament. But I would like to think that at the end of my time in Parliament, I can look back and say, I always did the right thing. I always served the public interest, and I made a difference in terms of furthering that public interest. And I'm particularly interested, obviously, in law and justice issues, but I'm also really interested in health and education and how you strike the balance between private interest and the public interest, how you identify when private interest is playing a non-legitimate role, when it's undermining the public interest. And if I can look back at the end and say that I furthered the public interest in that particular way, then I think I would have met my own benchmark. Even though that's quite vague and intangible, I would accept.
Thank you. That makes sense. And how will you respond when there's an issue that causes your personal values and your party values to be in conflict?
That's a really important question, and it's a question that's been posed to me when I've contested other elections. The first thing I'd say is, I first joined the Labor Party at 18, so I've joined the party that I think is the best fit with my values and my ethics, I suppose. So I would hope in that context that any fundamental dispute between any personal view or value I hold and the party's views and values is pretty rare and pretty minimal. I've heard over the years candidates at different forums and stuff promise to cross the floor and promise to leave the party and promise to always vote a particular way. And I don't think that that's necessarily always a virtuous position. The reality of human endeavour and furthering the public interest in our system is that by and large we do it through parties. I hope to be really effective in all the forums that I'm involved in, including the Labor Party forums, and any law or policy that will be enacted in any government that I serve in is going to be a law or policy generally that goes through a caucus process, goes through a cabinet process. And of course, the Labor Party has a conference every year where we set our program and policy. So I want to contribute in all of those forums, but I would never advertise myself as somebody that is going to likely cross the floor or leave the party or things of that. That is very often, I think, a betrayal of the public interest and a betrayal of the basis on which you're elected. And we've seen recently with Lydia Thorpe in the Greens, and I don't make any particular comment on her, and I'm obviously not privy to all of those circumstances, but something very fundamental about the democratic contract between the people and the elected representative, I think, is torn asunder when you leave the party that got you elected. She was not elected as Lydia Thorpe. She was elected as a Green Party representative, yet she now sits in the Senate as an independent. Now, I'm not suggesting that our system should be changed so the party determines who sits in Parliament. That would give a lot of power to party officials, would give them the power, for example, to expel people from parties and see them expelled from Parliament. But it's not a good outcome when someone leaves the party that they were elected. So I guess my promise or my pledge is to be very effective in the forums that I operate in and to assure people that my values and my policies are Labor. It's the reason I first joined the Labor Party at 18. And also to say that ultimately in the Labor Party, there is recognition on a fairly regular basis of conscious votes. So there are a whole range of situations when you do get to vote according to your conscience. But you are otherwise bound by a party line and you contribute to the party policy. You have the arguments in the party. If you lose, you are bound by the party line. And that's a really important part of progress in our system. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't have parties. We'd have a whole parliament of independents. We wouldn't have people getting elected because they're part of a group of like-minded people who want to advance the public interest in a particular way. And I don't think that would be a good system.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining. And finally, are there any advantages to having an upper house representative that's connected to our region?
I certainly think so. And I think that my candidature, I think for the first time in living memory for the upper house being a Dubbo resident, is an opportunity effectively for our region to have 2 MPs, because we will have a person elected in the lower house and it's either going to be Dougal Saunders, Kate Richards or Josh Black. Kate's running for the Shooters, Josh is running for the Labor Party. But irrespective of that outcome, if I'm elected from the 7th spot on the Labor ticket, then we will have an extra MP, and I'm sure people who know my track record across the region will know that I won't just be there voting on legislation in the upper house. I will be accessible to people. I'll be in the community all the time, and I'll be able to be an advocate for people on their issues with government.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time today, Stephen. Really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. And thanks so much, Laura, for doing this series. It's really great.
Thank you.